Hi, it's me, Ingrid NFP, and we're going to be doing some crochet here while I talk about these books that I've read. So I've read Fyodor Dostoevsky's White Nights, and I actually listened to the audiobook at the same time as I was reading this physical copy of the book. However, I found out that they were two different translations, and I couldn't decide which translation was better, so I ended up basically I was a little bit discomforted during the whole thing. I don't really know what I think about this book. It's kind of an incel just some lost girl, and they meet, and then this nice guy, incel guy, starts, he's never talked to a girl before, and he's like all over dramatic about the whole thing, and it's like he goes into like these lyrical rambles about, but so he doesn't see her as a person, and she doesn't see really him as a person, and they fall in love with each other, but it's really shallow, and it's basically because they're both lonely. And I thought White Nights meant was like winter, so I put off reading this because it's not winter right now. Right now we're like nearing summer, but actually White Nights was referring to actually the long days that come at this certain period of the year. And I kind of understand this kind of liminal space of like the nights are really short, and it's light outside, even though a lot of people are going to sleep. Right now it's slightly light outside. You can't see with the blinds, but it's nearing 9 p.m. And like people are getting ready to go to bed soon, but the light is still out. So I thought that it was an appropriate term for the title of this book. I do have a quote though that I wanted to share. Only one, because it's a very short book. It's like 100 pages. My Nastenka was so timid, so afraid, that it seemed she understood at last that I love her, and she took pity on my poor love. And so it is that when we are unhappy, we more strongly feel the unhappiness of others. Feeling is not shattered, but becomes concentrated. So yeah, being unhappy basically makes you feel everybody else is unhappy. So it concentrates the feeling, kind of. So I thought that was a nice quote. The rest of it was very simply said, it wasn't like overly wordy. And I think that that's what I liked, because it was a short story that it got to the point. And yeah, it's a tragic love story, but it's not really a love story. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is to show how ridiculous these two characters are being. And it's actually kind of funny because it's like dark humor, It's like, yeah, this wasn't ever going to work out. But they're young and in love, And she's like, oh, you're so unselfish. And then it's like, well, he's actually being like the most selfish prick ever, So I thought that was funny. And then the other book that I read was, or listened to, the audiobook, was Gina Rippon's new book. It has actually two names, and the one that I read, the name of that one was called The Lost Girls of Autism. But she has another one called I don't know what it's called. It's the same book, it's just that it has two different titles. So that's confused me quite a bit. But basically it was a newly released audiobook. And I thought that it seemed interesting because it was going to be, Gina Rippon is a neuroscientist. And so I thought, that we'd get some new groundbreaking research since it's a new book and, she's doing research. But it really wasn't that. And also I thought they would be more, what can we say? I'm just thinking, you guys here. I thought that it would be more about, about the experiences of autistic girls. But Gina Rippon is a neurotypical scientist, and she did not include many interviews, really. Like, she did include some examples, but it was also really stereotypical. Like, she talked about some books that she'd read that are about, like, they're written by women with autism. And from the reviews of those books that she's read, I think that they are pretty, I have some issues with this book. One of them is that she talks about how she makes a huge point at the beginning to say that, she wants to be respectful to trans people, and she's going to be using these terms because they're the terms that are used in science and stuff like that. But it's like, you can't really talk about females and males at this point in time anymore. Especially, you can't say female gender, because the whole definition of gender is gender identity, right? And you can't say that the female, like, sex and gender are different. She should have been, like, explicit in that. Okay, so she's talking about sex, she's not talking about gender. She has a whole chapter about gender dysphoria, and it's like, it doesn't seem like she knows enough about that topic in terms of sociological implications to actually write a chapter about that in her book. Not novel, it's a nonfiction. But, if she did studies herself about, queerness and the brain and all that, then I might have thought that was okay. But her research is not about trans people, and she seemed to find it kind of silly. I don't know if it's just like tone of her in her audiobook, like her tone of voice or whatever, but it did sound like she was preachy. And I don't know if it's just because she has a British accent, and quite a posh British accent, or that her voice is shrill or whatever, or if it's like her actual tone. But it didn't really work. She uses the medical model of disability, and nowhere does she talk about really ableism. And she doesn't really give many solutions about how to help autistic women. I think that the book is geared towards, like, medical practitioners rather than actual autistic people. Which, so how does it help me as a medical professional? Well, I know enough about autism that this wasn't really nothing new. She did talk, though, about how autistic girls might not be found as somebody who is a loner and has no friends, because girls in general, when they are camouflaging even from school age. So she uses the term camouflaging rather than masking, which, she's not using the agreed upon terms here that the community has decided on. So, but yeah, so she says camouflaging. But she talks about how girls will flit between groups social groups and stay on the edge of the games that are being played rather than like totally being on their own, so that it will seem to an outside observer that, oh, they have friends, look, they're playing with other girls, when really they're not being socially accepted anywhere. I thought that that was the most poignant example of that I really related to. She talked a lot about like neurological stuff, but I got, even, I'm somebody who knows about neuroscience, but I got a little bit lost. She does explain things very well, but I found it kind of boring because it never came to any like conclusions about like, okay, is there a difference between male and female autism if that's what she wants to do, or how are they similar, or either that, or don't talk about male and female autism. I'm glad that she doesn't like say that there should be criteria for female autism, because male and female are not a thing in the terms of gender. So I'm glad that she doesn't go on that route, but I don't know, it was a little bit confusing. It was like, well, what are your conclusions about all of this? Like, yes, okay, we should, women should be, diagnosed in a different way, and we should take into account masking when we're diagnosing autistic girls. But apart from that, she didn't really make any mind-blowing statements, She does go into some interesting things about neuron pruning and stuff like that, which I found kind of interesting, but she didn't go really deep into those kinds of things. She talked about genes and how genes can be located on any chromosome, and that there are a tremendous amount of genes, and how they conduct these studies, which I found quite interesting. I think that she should have limited herself to like writing a research paper detailing different, or maybe doing a meta-analysis research paper about like certain topics, talking about what is autism caused by, what characteristics are in the brain of autistic people, but by trying to couple it to the sociological about the female brain and all that, she kind of lost me there. She's a scientist who has debunked the idea of a gendered brain, so I think that that's important to note. And so she is progressive in certain ways, but you can tell from the way that she discusses things that she has a pretty neurotypical and traditional view on certain topics. Even if she has done the research, it hits wrong. Maybe because I was expecting something else out of that book. Like I was expecting either some groundbreaking research or something that was mixing research with interviews of actual autistic girls and women and weaving those things together, and like kind of a feel good kind of like either like a call for action or something that gives some inspiration for autistic women. But really, I left the book not getting any of that. So that's about that book. The next book that I'm thinking of listening an audiobook and reading at the same time is this book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer. Right. I haven't read it yet. Um, I don't really know what to expect. It's going to be like facts, but also like kind of a novel about, like, I guess this is semi-autobiographical, and a little bit talking about Native Americans and how, you know, how they are connected to nature and all that. Maybe some kind of ecological aspects to think of. I don't know. But I've actually been talking to my mom on the, we, you know, we used to Skype. Now we're trying out different things because Skype doesn't exist anymore. But we were discussing, she's actually part of an embroidery club, you could say. Like, she's making this quilt together with some other women. It's kind of like it's kind of like a book club, but it's like everybody's crafting. My mom doesn't know really much about crafting. My grandma, her mom, was seamstress for a short amount of time before my grandma became a realtor. My grandma actually won a sewing machine when she was like 15 or something, from like this sewing contest. So my mom grew up to hate sewing, because, well, it was like she had to do sewing in Girl Scouts and stuff, and it was like, because her mom was always sewing things, like she was expected to be good at sewing, but she really never got excited about that. But so now, my dad, I asked my dad, like, oh, what is my mom doing at this club thing? And he was like, oh, she's doing crochet. And I was like, no, I'm doing crochet. I said, I don't think that she's doing crochet. And he said, yeah, she's doing crochet. She's not doing crochet. Because how would I remember that? She is doing embroidery, and it's kind of like an art piece that they're working on together for this museum on the other side of France. It was like the place that they're making, like they're creating an exhibition at this museum about braids and about what's it called, lace and that kind of thing. Apparently this like a factory where they would make this was part of a huge flood just a few years ago, and so all of these, pieces of fabric got all messed up. And so what they're doing now is that they're making a quilt with like the discarded pieces that were affected by the flood and that have been washed, and doing some girl power, embroidery on it, and working on this together as it's like part of the art is the community that is coming from it. So my mom just she loves meeting people. I think that my mom is like an ENFJ or a ENFP. I'm not sure really, but she's an extroverted NF, you could say, and she just really, really enjoys meeting new people. That's like her thing in life. And she's gotten to know these women and all sorts of things about them, like their deepest traumas and everything. And then which she then recounts to me. But these women sometimes have really, these women can come and go, or it's the same people every time. My mom likes to listen to their stories, and she says that she does pretty bad embroidery compared to everybody else. And my mom is not, really into the crafts arts, but she just loves being there. And so I was telling her, oh, well, I'm actually going to start reading this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And I also told her about there are connections with everything, I was thinking about, because she was telling me about how one of the women was a woman from Ukraine who had been braiding hemp, because hemp grows a lot in Ukraine, and it's like braiding sweetgrass. So that's why I recommended that. And I also told her, oh yeah, there's a song about that by Goa. It's called the Shum, and it's basically, well, they're gathering hemp in Ukraine, and well, basically hemp is marijuana. So yeah, it's a little bit like a hallucination trip in the music. But so we had a really interesting discussion about like weaving and braiding and why it was important. I told her about also the Wheel of Time is about how everything is a tapestry, like time and the whole thing about like the wheel of the loom and everything. We were talking about all of these metaphors. So it's a pretty interesting conversation I had with my mom. Tell me what you guys think, if you have any kinds of like connection to like fabric arts. Like I'm doing like crochet. It's not really good, but I'm getting there. I'm doing this. It looks like a little bit like it's yellow and green. You can't see probably because the light is so bad. But it's a little bit like a dandelion or like a sunflower, I don't know, but it's more like a dandelion. So yeah, tell me what you guys think. Maybe you've read this book before. Have a great day, everybody.